Good evening and welcome. During our service this evening, we'll be singing songs from the song sheet. Our first song will be Christ Be Our Light. We'll sing verse 1 following the praying of the Our Father. So let us stand. And so we pray, Lord, at all times it causes us to tremble when we consider the sorrow, pain, and suffering you so freely took upon yourself for us. As we follow you to the cross, we can't help but ask why this horrible thing must happen. How is it that the shouts of Hosanna have so quickly turned into shouts of crucify him? But deep down we know. Deep down we know whose sin causes your death. It is our sin, our rejection, our treason that brought you to the Calvary. Yes, we were truly there. We humbly pray that your love, forgiveness, and mercy, so that so greatly offended us, may now be extended to us. Grant that we may die to our sin, and so be raised to new life with you. We ask all this and everything else in the words you taught us to pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Were you there when they crucified our Lord?
Yes, we were there.
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree?
Yes, we were there.
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb?
Yes, we were there.
Were you there when they said, "This Jesus must die"?
Yes, we were there.
Then who among you would like to testify to what you witnessed with this Jesus? I'm sure that everyone wants to hear how you encountered this Jesus. Please be seated.
A reading from Luke. Jesus came to Jericho and intended to pass through the town. Now a man there named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector and also a wealthy man, was seeking to see who Jesus was, but he could not see him because of the crowd, for he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree in order to see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When he reached the place, Jesus looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down quickly, for today I must stay at your house." And he came down quickly and received him with joy. When they all saw this, they began to grumble, saying, "He has gone to stay at the house of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Behold, half of my possessions, Lord, I shall give to the poor. And if I have extorted anything from anyone, I shall repay it 4 times over." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a descendant of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save what was lost."
Let us all sing "Christ Be Our Light," verse 2.
I'll never forgive Jesus for that. Of all the people he could have stayed with, why Zacchaeus? Of all the inhabitants of Jericho, Zacchaeus was the worst possible choice. Zacchaeus was a traitor, a turncoat. He had sold out to the enemy. And to top it all off, he was getting rich in the process. You've got to hand it to the Romans. They are as smart as they are cruel. They knew how much we Israelites hated paying their stinking taxes. No one likes taxes. But it's twice as bad when the money goes to the empire that has conquered your country and now occupies it. And so who do the Romans get to collect their taxes? Do they send in Roman tax collectors? No. They hire our people to do their dirty work for them. And how do they pay these dirty traitors? Tax collectors can charge whatever they can get away with. And after they send in what Rome expects, they get to keep whatever's left. No questions asked. What sort of people would help the enemy and steal from their own people at the same time? I'll tell you what kind. Greedy pigs. Pigs who are out to make an easy buck, even if it means working for the Romans and stealing from your own people. And that's exactly the kind of person Zacchaeus is. Someone who betrayed his own people, happily got rich off their toil and labor, and through it all, helped keep the Romans in power. And oh, how rich he became in the process. He admits it himself. He promises to give half his possessions to the poor and repay all those he's defrauded 4 times as much. Where do you think he got all that money in the first place? He got it from us. He cheated us and he robbed us for years, while all the time he's lived high and mighty. And now he thinks he can just make it all better by giving back part of what he stole in the first place? He makes me sick. It makes me sick even to think about it. And now, how does he get repaid for all this evil? What's his punishment for selling out his own people? Jesus declares him saved. Of all people, Jesus says salvation has come to Zacchaeus. It isn't right and it isn't fair. Jesus has no right to say to Zacchaeus that he'll be saved. Zacchaeus is the worst kind of sinner. Jesus is way out of line. He's really kind of dangerous. Something should be done about him. We can't stand for this. This Jesus must die.
Let us repeat, Christ be our light, verse 2.
Longing for peace, our world is troubled. Longing for hope, many despair. The word alone has power to save us. Make us your living Lord. Christ,
Be our light, shine in our hearts, shine through the darkness. Christ, be our light, shine in your church, gathered together. Does anyone else want to share their experiences with us? We'd love to hear what you have to say.
A reading from Luke. Jesus was teaching in a synagogue on the Sabbath, and a woman was there who for 18 years had been crippled by a spirit. She was bent over, completely incapable of standing erect. When Jesus saw her, he called to her and said, "Woman, you are set free of your infirmity." He laid his hands on her, and she at once stood up straight and glorified God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant that Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, said to the crowd in reply, "There are 6 days when work should be done. Come on those days to be cured, not on the Sabbath day." The Lord said to him in reply, "Hypocrites! Does not each one of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or ass from the manger and lead it out for watering? This daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 years now, ought she not to have been set free on the Sabbath day from her bondage?" When he said this, all his adversaries were humiliated, and the whole crowd rejoiced at all the splendid deeds done by him.
I resent being called a hypocrite. I'm a leader of the synagogue. I was just doing my job. I had to say something. I wasn't the one in the wrong. Jesus was the one making trouble. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that all Jesus did was heal that poor woman. How could that be wrong? It's not that Jesus healed her. It's when he healed her. He healed her on the Sabbath. Work is plainly forbidden on the Sabbath, and healing is considered work. Now, that's not my idea. I didn't come up with that rule. God did. It's the 3rd commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the 7th day of the Sabbath to the Lord your God you shall not do any work. This Jesus has no right to go around breaking God's commandments whenever he feels like it. Now, this may sound harsh, but it really isn't. Following God's commandments gives order and structure to our lives. What would happen if people just decided to stop following the 5th commandment? You shall not kill. Society would fall into chaos, and that is why something as simple as healing on the Sabbath must be stopped. If that kind of thinking spreads, it could lead to all kinds of trouble. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not upset that Jesus healed that poor woman. It was a great act of kindness and an impressive demonstration of God's healing power. But not on the Sabbath. Why couldn't he have just waited a few hours to heal her? Soon the Sabbath would have ended, and then everything would have been fine. She'd been that way for 18 years. Would a few more hours really make any difference? If he had just waited, we could have avoided all this trouble. But for whatever reason, Jesus didn't wait. He just forged ahead, breaking God's law, ignoring our tradition, making a mockery of our way of life. And not only that, he drove a wedge between those of us in authority and the common people. Those of us with positions of leadership had no choice but to question his acts. It is our job to defend the tradition, but the common people are so swept up in Jesus' teaching and healings, they can't see the larger picture. They don't see how dangerous this Jesus is. We must put a stop to this. Jesus cannot be allowed to continue to cause trouble. He is dangerous. This Jesus must die.
Please join us in singing Christ Be Our Light, verse 4.
Longing for shelter, many are homeless. Longing for warmth, many are cold. Make us your building, sheltering others. Walls made of living stone.
Christ be our light, shine in our hearts, shine through the darkness. Christ be our light, shine in your church, gathered today. Can anyone else add to what we've heard this evening? Come, share your story with us.
A reading from Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "To you who hear, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. And from the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold even your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from the one who takes what is yours, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you."
I can't believe this is happening. My teenage son has just come home, spouting some new philosophy that bounds to get him into trouble. Those of you who are parents of teenagers will understand what I'm talking about. You know how impressionable teenagers are. They're always excited about whatever the newest craze is, no matter how crazy it is. One of the toughest jobs in the world has got to be raising kids and keeping them on the right track. The last thing we need is some crazy preacher filling our kids' heads with new and revolutionary ideas, especially dangerous ideas. What kind of dangerous ideas, you ask? How about this for starters? Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who abuse you. Can you believe it? That's the kind of ideas my kids are coming home with. And if that's not bad enough, this crazy preacher is telling my kids that if someone hits them, they should just stand there and get hit a second time. He says if a thief steals your coat, take off your shirt and give that to him as well. And then my favorite, give to everyone who begs. Can you believe it? He tells them to give to beggars. There is nothing worse than walking down a big city street and seeing all those beggars. And you know that whatever you give them won't make a bit of difference. It's just like throwing your hard-earned money away. If I told my children once, I've told them 1,000 times. Give beggars sympathy, not money. But do they listen to me, to what we teach them? No, they'd rather listen to some preacher who doesn't have anything to give away. They'd rather listen to someone who sums up his philosophy like this: do to others as you would have them do to you. Can you believe that? This guy's got it all backwards. It's supposed to be do to others what they do to you. I have no trouble being good to those who are good to me. And that's what I've taught my children. But this idea of loving your enemies and giving without getting back, it's just crazy. I don't want my children throwing away their lives. I want my children to be happy and successful. And like it or not, that means you've got to be tough. You've got to watch out for yourself. Take what's yours and fight for your rights. You know, this really ticks me off. I try to raise my kids to be responsible, successful people, and then this Jesus comes along and fills their heads with all sorts of mush. This Jesus is dangerous. Someone should do something about him. We just can't sit around and let him teach our children all kinds of stuff. These children must be silenced. This Jesus must die.
Please join us in singing Christ Be Our Light, verse 5.
Well, has anyone else witnessed what this Jesus has done? Come, share your story.
A reading from John. Early in the morning, Jesus arrived again in the temple area, and all the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and made her stand in the middle. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. And in response, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. So he was left alone with the woman before him. Then Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No one, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore."
A gross miscarriage of justice took place that day. I was among the Pharisees who brought that shameful woman to Jesus. We knew it was his custom to go and teach at the temple, and we were sure we would find him there. And now we finally had the perfect opportunity to clear up all this confusion. It's one thing to talk about forgiving sinners. It's another to deal with a sinner who was caught in the act. We were sure Jesus couldn't weasel his way out of this one. Once and for all, we would make him acknowledge that sinners must pay. Everything was going perfectly at first. The adulterous woman never once denied her guilt, never once even begged for mercy. Like the rest of us, she knew she was wrong. She knew she deserved punishment. God's law must be upheld. Everything was going perfectly. Even Jesus made no reply at first. He just bent over and started drawing on the ground. At last, the great teacher had nothing to say. There was no way to get out of this one. This woman deserved death, period. When Jesus finally did speak, I thought we had won for sure. He said, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." He admitted she deserved death. We had won. Jesus couldn't deny this law this time. I started looking around for a stone to carry out the judgment. It was then that I realized something was wrong. The rest of the scribes and Pharisees looked uncomfortable. I couldn't believe my eyes. They weren't going to let this stop them, were they? We are righteous people. We follow the law. We make the proper sacrifices. We do what God expects of us. We had every right to judge this woman and to carry out the judgment. We were not caught sinning. She was. And then things went from bad to worse. Everyone started walking away. These people who had done everything in their power to follow God's law had been chased off by Jesus' trickery. Maybe none of us was completely without sin. Nobody's perfect. But we were surely better than this evil woman before us. It was all I could do to keep from shouting at my colleagues to stop. What's the matter with all of you? I wanted to say. This woman deserves death. Don't let a little case of conscience cloud your judgment. Compared to her, we are without sin. But I said nothing. I just stood there as they walked away. I finally left too. I couldn't believe this Jesus had won again. And now, more than ever, I know how much he must be stopped. He can't go on making a mockery of our law and accusing good people of being sinners. He's dangerous. This Jesus must die.
Please join us in singing Christ Be Our Light, verse 3.
Longing for food, many are hungry, longing for water, many still thirst. Make us your bread, broken for others, shared until all are fed. Christ be our light, shine in our hearts, shine through the darkness. Christ be our light, shine in your church, gathered today.
Has anyone else got any more to share? Please come forward and offer your saying.
A reading from Luke. Jesus said, "A man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me.' So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country, where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. Coming to his senses, he thought, 'How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat, but here am I, dying from hunger. I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers.' So he got up and went back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But his father ordered his servants, 'Quickly bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.' Then the celebration began.
This parable wrecked my life. I'm serious. It wrecked my life. Let me tell you how. My father and I were there when Jesus told this parable you call the prodigal son. And it was almost as if he was talking about our family. My father had 2 children, myself and my younger brother, and the similarities, unfortunately, don't end there. My younger brother is also wasteful, spoiled, undisciplined, good for nothing. Of course, it took my father years to admit this. In the beginning, Dad always had an excuse for why his little boy didn't measure up. Soon, my brother didn't even need to make excuses. Dad would forgive him before he even asked. And of course, I played my part in our little family drama. I was the responsible one. I did my share of the work and my brother's share. Dad finally did come to his senses. Somehow, my father found the courage to admit to himself that this couldn't continue. He knew it wasn't right, and so Dad kicked my brother out. Those were the good old days. We hired someone to take his place, and for the first time in years, the work was starting to get done. Schedules were met, productivity rose, and everything went great. After time, even my father seemed to accept the loss of his son in exchange for efficiency and increased profits. But then it happened. Jesus came along. My father and I just happened to be there when Jesus was teaching. He started telling parables, one about a lost sheep, a second about a lost coin, and then Jesus started this third parable. There was a man who had 2 children. That was the beginning of the end. When the parable was over, my father ran off in tears, mumbling something about his poor baby. My father came home late that night. He was half carrying my brother, who was too drunk to walk by himself. Before I could even say anything, Dad announced that my brother was home to stay. That was 2 years ago. We went bankrupt a few months after my brother came home. My father fell sick and soon died because we couldn't afford a doctor. And me? I now work for minimum wage on someone else's farm, and all because of Jesus in this parable. You know, I don't know if my father really even understood what Jesus was getting at in this parable. Jesus was talking about how God treats sinners, not how fathers should treat their children. It makes me angry every time I think about it. Just look what this kind of thinking did to me. Can you imagine what would happen if God really forgave sinners like that? What was that Jesus thinking? How could he even say such things? Someone should stop him. He's dangerous. This Jesus must die.
Please join us in singing O Sacred Heads Surrounded, verse 1.
O sacred heads surrounded by crown of piercing thorn, O bleeding heads of wounded, regarded to storm, the power of death comes o'er you, the blow of life decays. Dead angels who adore you and tremble as they gaze.
Is there anyone else who wishes to share with us? Please.
A reading from Mark. They led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. Peter followed him at a distance into the high priest's courtyard and was seated with the guards, warming himself at the fire. The chief priests and the entire Sanhedrin kept trying to obtain testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death, but they found none. Many gave false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. Some took the stand and testified falsely against him, alleging, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another not made with hands.' Even so, their testimony did not agree. The high priest rose before the assembly and questioned Jesus, saying, 'Have you no answer? "What are these men testifying against you?" But he was silent and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him and said to him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Then Jesus answered, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven." At this the high priest tore his garments and said, "What further need have we of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They all condemned him as deserving to die.
For a moment there, I thought our case against this Jesus might not hold up. We had lined up so many witnesses to testify against him that surely 2 of them would agree on some horrible thing he had said or done. But we were having no such luck. None of their testimony was the same. I was afraid we were going to have to let him go. I knew Pilate would never have him executed if we couldn't pin something solid on him and back it up with at least 2 witnesses. And if ever anyone needed to be killed, Jesus did. I had been hearing for months about all the trouble he was causing, stirring up the crowds, arguing with religious authorities, even claiming to be the Messiah. That's exactly what I needed. Some would-be Messiah to stir up the masses and start an armed rebellion against Rome. Can you imagine the bloodshed and the destruction? Not to mention the religious and political consequences? The last thing I needed was some blaspheming rabble-rouser to mess up everything. Everything I had worked for. But now, we finally had brought him to trial. Everything seemed to be slipping away. We were out of witnesses. We had proved nothing. We would have to let him go. I knew I only had one more chance, and I knew it was a long shot. But what other choice did I have? So I asked him straight out, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" I didn't expect him to answer. I assumed he would just remain silent. So I couldn't believe my ears when he answered, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." It was more than I could have hoped for in my wildest dreams. Right there in front of everyone, he openly admitted to being both Messiah and God's Son. We needed no more evidence. We needed no more witnesses. Pilate would have to do something now. Pilate would have to kill anyone who claimed to be a king or God, and this Jesus had just claimed to be both. Pilate would never know what a favor he was doing me when he sentenced this Jesus to death. Finally, all my troubles would be over. Jesus' reputation as a teacher, healer, and miracle worker would just slowly fade away. His ragtag followers would disband, and all this nonsense would finally come to an end. Order would be restored. Jesus had caused enough trouble. Someone had to do something about it. He's dangerous. He has to be stopped. He has to be silenced. There's no doubt about it. This Jesus must die.
Please join us in singing "O Sacred Head Surrounded," verse 2.
I see your strength and vigor, all fading in the strife, and death with cruel vigor, relieving you of life. Oh, agony and dying, oh, life.
And now it's my turn. I wish to share with you my encounter with Jesus.
A reading from Luke. 2 others, both criminals, were led away with Jesus to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him and the criminals there, one on his right, the other on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." They divided his garments by casting lots. The people stood by and watched. The rulers, meanwhile, sneered at him and said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the chosen one, the Messiah of God." Even the soldiers jeered at him. As they approached to offer him wine, they called out, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." Above him there was an inscription that read, "This is the King of the Jews." Now one of the criminals hanging there reviled Jesus, saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." The other, however, rebuking him, said in reply, "Have you no fear of God? For you are subject to the same condemnation. And indeed, we have been condemned justly, for the sentence we received corresponds to our crimes. But this man has done nothing criminal." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus replied to him, "Amen, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Now it was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, because of an eclipse of the sun. Then the veil of the temple was torn down the middle. Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And when he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion who witnessed what had happened glorified God and said, "This man was innocent beyond doubt." When all the people who had gathered for this spectacle saw what had happened, they returned home, beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances stood at a distance, including the women who had followed him from Galilee and saw these events.
Can you believe this guy? Even as he hangs on the cross dying, he extends God's grace and mercy to those who don't deserve it. Who is he to say, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise"? Does he get it? Doesn't he realize that's exactly the kind of talk that got him crucified? We've had enough of this offering God's grace and mercy to the underserving. He can't be allowed to continue forgiving sinners like that. What about us? What about us good, religious people? What about those of us who try as hard as we can to do what God expects of us? Oh, we might not be perfect, but at least we try. Don't we deserve something for at least trying? I hate to admit it, but I resent the fact that Jesus freely offers sinners what I have worked so hard to earn. Now, I understand why so many people thought Jesus must die. His notion of God's forgiveness really is offensive to those of us who try our best to earn God's salvation. And I always assumed bad people thought Jesus must die. But all of a sudden, that other thing Jesus said from the cross makes sense. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." I never thought that the they included me. It makes one wonder if we're as good as we think we are. We obviously need as much forgiveness as anyone else Jesus forgave. But now it's too late. Jesus is crucified. He's dead and buried. And without knowing it, we put to death the one God sent to save us. But we can't undo what we've done. It's out of our hands. I guess now it's all up to God.
Please join us in singing Were You There? Verses 1, 2, and 5.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, something